I never thought I'd be the kind of man to sit behind a screen and write about something like this. But maybe that's why I'm doing it anonymously. If anyone who knew me in real life were to read this, they'd never guess it was me. On the outside, I'm the husband who shows up, pays the bills, and maintains an image of stability. But on the inside, I was crumbling, and, strangely enough, it all began with my dog. My wife bought him for me 3 years ago, back when she still cared about what I wanted. A German Shepherd, full of energy, full of need. At first, I didn't want the responsibility. Walking him twice a day felt like another chore stacked on top of everything else in my life. But over time, those walks became my only real escape. At home, my wife had grown distant. Our conversations were reduced to logistics, bills, groceries, reminders about who needed what. The warmth that once lived between us had disappeared like steam off a winter window. The dog, on the other hand, looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. And maybe that's why, in a strange way, he became my anchor. He gave me routine, and in that routine, something unexpected entered my life. It was late spring when I first noticed her. She was out on the same trail I took every morning, a leash in one hand, earbuds tucked into her messy blonde hair. She wasn't model perfect, but she had a glow about her, the kind of glow that told you she laughed easily, that she felt alive in ways I no longer did at home. I didn't speak to her that first morning. I just noticed. My dog pulled toward hers, sniffing and circling as dogs do, and she smiled in my direction before moving on. That smile, innocent as it was, stuck in my head all day. The next morning, I found myself half hoping she'd be there again. And she was. Same smile, same energy. This time she said something simple, "Looks like our dogs are becoming friends." I nodded, chuckled, said something back about how my dog was usually picky with other dogs. Just small talk, but small talk was more intimacy than I was used to getting from my wife these days. Over the next 2 weeks, those short exchanges grew longer. We talked about everything and nothing, the weather, work stress, even the quirks of our dogs. I learned her name was Claire. She was recently separated, not yet divorced. She laughed about how her ex-husband never liked dogs, how walking hers was the only thing keeping her sane through the long nights. And though she never said it directly, I could hear the loneliness in her voice. The first time we stopped walking and actually sat down on the bench by the pond, I felt something shift. I don't know if it was her leaning just slightly closer as she laughed, or the way her hand brushed mine when she reached down to pet my dog, but something inside me stirred. Something that had been asleep for years. I went home that day and felt guilty, even though nothing had happened. My wife was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone when I walked in. She barely looked up to ask if I remembered to pick up bread. No kiss, no warmth, not even eye contact. And I realized that in 10 minutes of conversation with Claire, I had felt more seen than I had in months with the woman I married. That night, lying next to my wife in silence, I replayed the sound of Claire's laugh in my head. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just nice to have someone friendly to talk to. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel the pull, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff and knowing eventually you'll want to see what it feels like to fall. The days went on, and I started timing my walks to hers without even realizing it. The anticipation grew into something I couldn't control. Every time I saw her waiting by the trail, my chest tightened, my pulse quickened. And I could see it in her eyes too, that unspoken understanding that what we were doing wasn't just walking our dogs anymore. It was circling around something dangerous, something forbidden. The first time she touched my arm, really touched it, her hand lingering just a second too long while telling a story, I felt the world tilt. I wanted more, I needed more, and I hated myself for it. At night, my dog curled up at the foot of my bed, loyal and oblivious, while I lay awake thinking about another woman's smile. I knew I was standing on the edge of something I could never undo. And yet, even then, I think part of me wanted to fall. The more I walked with Claire, the more I realized how starved I was for attention. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about being noticed, being listened to, being valued. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. She remembered small details about me that my wife had long since forgotten, or maybe stopped caring about. Things like how I hated mornings but loved the quiet before sunrise, or how I always stopped at the same coffee shop after a walk. At home, life had become mechanical. My wife and I existed side by side, but not together. We ate in silence, slept in silence, and even fought in silence. Our arguments were muted, passive, cold. I told myself that's what marriage was after years together, but walking with Claire made me realize it didn't have to be that way. It wasn't long before our conversations moved beyond surface-level chatter. She started confiding in me about her failed marriage, how her ex had belittled her dreams, how he'd made her feel invisible in her own home. Every time she spoke, it was like she was holding a mirror to my own life. I knew what it felt like to be invisible. I knew what it felt like to go to bed each night next to someone who no longer wanted to know you. One morning, after we'd walked farther than usual, we ended up at a little coffee shop near the edge of the park. It felt bold, even reckless, to sit there with her, sipping cappuccinos while our dogs lay curled at our feet. We were surrounded by strangers, but I felt exposed, like everyone around us could see what was happening between us, something electric, something neither of us dared name. She leaned across the table, her voice low, her eyes holding mine longer than necessary. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" she asked. The question hit me hard. "All the time," I admitted. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, charged. Her hand brushed mine across the table, not by accident, and this time I didn't pull away. The warmth of her skin against mine sent a jolt straight through me. When I got home, my wife was sitting on the couch scrolling her phone, same as always. She asked how the dog was doing, barely looking up. I wanted to tell her I'd just crossed a line, even if it was small. But instead, I said, "He's fine," and went upstairs to shower. The water couldn't wash away the guilt or the thrill. The next week, our walks became less about the dogs and more about us. Sometimes we didn't even walk, we'd sit on that same bench by the pond, talking until the sky turned orange with sunset. Other times, she'd bring a flask of wine in her bag, and we'd share it like teenagers sneaking drinks behind the school. Every sip loosened the strings we were both trying to hold tight. One evening, as we walked back toward the parking lot, she stopped suddenly and turned to me. "You know this is dangerous, right?" she said, her eyes searching mine. "Yeah," I replied, my voice low. "I know, but you don't want to stop, do you?" I swallowed hard. "No, I don't." That was the moment I knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't going away. It didn't take long before we started finding excuses to see each other outside of the walks. She asked if I could help her move some boxes into her garage one weekend, and I agreed without hesitation. My heart pounded the entire drive over. It felt like I was heading toward a storm I couldn't turn away from. When I arrived, she was waiting at the door, hair tied back, a loose shirt slipping off one shoulder. Her smile was softer than usual, almost nervous. We carried boxes together, brushing against each other in the cramped space of her garage. Every accidental touch lingered, every glance lasted a second too long. When the last box was stacked, we just stood there, staring at each other in the dim light. My chest was tight, my hands restless. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of her body. For a heartbeat, we hovered on the edge of something irreversible. But then, she pulled back. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice trembling. I left her house that night in a haze of frustration and longing. I wanted her more than I'd ever wanted anything in years. My wife was asleep when I got home, curled up on her side, the space between us in bed wider than ever. I lay there staring at the ceiling, aching with desire and drowning in guilt. Still, I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. Claire had become the highlight of my days, the reason I smiled, the reason I still felt alive. I told myself we were only delaying the inevitable. And deep down, I think she knew it too. There's a moment before you make a mistake when your whole body knows it's coming. Your chest gets tight, your breathing shortens, and some quiet voice inside begs you to stop. But there's also another voice, the louder one, that tells you it's worth it, that it's what you've been craving all along. With Claire, that louder voice drowned out everything else. It happened on a Saturday evening. My wife had gone to visit her sister for the weekend, leaving me alone with the dog. Normally, I would have appreciated the rare solitude, maybe used it to watch a game or catch up on sleep. But instead, I texted Claire without even thinking. "You busy tonight?" She replied almost instantly, "No." "Why?" My heart raced as I typed back, "Come over. We'll walk the dogs." It wasn't really about the dogs, and we both knew it. When she showed up, the sun was just setting. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold, the kind of evening that felt like it was daring us to do something reckless. She wore jeans and a simple white top, her hair tied back but loose strands framing her face. She looked effortless. We walked the dogs around the neighborhood first, pretending it was just another ordinary evening. But neither of us could focus. The conversation was clipped, nervous. Our hands brushed once, and she didn't pull away. That single touch felt more intimate than anything I'd shared with my wife in years. By the time we circled back to my house, the tension was unbearable. The dogs ran ahead into the yard, tails wagging, oblivious to the storm brewing between us. I held the door open for her, and when she stepped inside, I swear the air changed. We stood in the living room, not speaking, just staring at each other. My chest pounded so hard I thought she could hear it. She bit her lip, a nervous habit I'd noticed before, and that was it, the last thread of restraint snapped. I stepped forward, and she met me halfway. Our lips collided with a force that was equal parts hunger and desperation. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't cautious. It was raw, the kind of kiss that says I've been waiting for this far too long. Her hands tangled in my hair, mine gripped her waist. The world outside disappeared. There was no marriage, no guilt, no consequences. There was only her, the taste of her mouth, the heat of her body pressed against mine. We stumbled toward the couch, laughing breathlessly between kisses, like two people who had just discovered fire. My hands roamed without thought, memorizing the shape of her, the warmth, the softness. She moaned quietly, and that sound, it nearly undid me. For a brief second, I hesitated. My wife's face flashed in my mind, the years we'd spent together, the vows we'd made. But then Claire whispered my name in a way that shattered every last piece of resistance. There was no going back. What happened next felt inevitable, like a dam finally bursting after years of pressure. Every touch, every kiss, every gasp was a rebellion against the emptiness I'd been living in. With her, I felt alive, truly alive, in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't just about the physical release. It was about being wanted, being desired, being seen. Afterward, we lay tangled together on the couch, the dogs asleep at our feet, as if nothing monumental had just happened. My chest rose and fell, still heavy with adrenaline. Her head rested on my shoulder, her fingers tracing lazy patterns across my skin. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, loaded with everything we both knew but couldn't say aloud. Finally, she broke it. "We shouldn't have," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I know," I replied, staring at the ceiling. "But I don't regret it." She lifted her head, her eyes locking onto mine. There was guilt there, sure, but also something else, something fierce, something alive. She kissed me softly, almost sadly, and then rested her head back down. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the dark. The house was quiet, my wife still miles away, but my mind was loud. I replayed every second of what had just happened, torn between guilt and exhilaration. I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. But here's the truth, I didn't feel sorry. Not then, not even close. Instead, I felt addicted. Addicted to the way she made me feel, addicted to the fire that had been missing from my life for so long. I knew I'd see her again, that I'd want more, that stopping wasn't an option anymore. I went to bed that night, the dog curled at my feet, my wife's side of the bed empty. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty at all. I felt alive. Once you cross that line, there's no returning to the innocence that existed before. Claire and I had stepped over it together, and now every look, every touch, every word between us carried weight. It wasn't just walks and casual laughter anymore. It was longing, it was hunger, it was risk. The strange part was how ordinary everything seemed on the outside. At home, I was still the same husband, making coffee in the mornings, fixing the squeaky hinge on the back door, walking the dog. To anyone watching, my life looked unchanged. But inside, I was split in two. One part of me was the husband, quiet and dutiful. The other part was something entirely different, alive, reckless, and addicted to moments with Claire. Our encounters became more frequent. Sometimes it was as simple as sneaking into her car after our dogs finished playing at the park, kissing until the windows fogged up. Other times it was afternoons in her house when she said she needed help with something. Those were the times that scared me the most, not because I didn't want them, but because I wanted them too much. The rush of it all was intoxicating. Every text from her made my pulse quicken. Every time she said, "When can I see you again?" I dropped everything to make it happen. I found myself inventing excuses for my wife, work meetings, errands, traffic jams, anything that bought me another hour with Claire. But as thrilling as it was, the guilt began creeping in like a shadow I couldn't shake. Some nights, I'd lie beside my wife, her breathing steady in sleep, and feel like the worst man alive. I'd watch her face in the dim glow of the alarm clock and wonder if she had any idea. Sometimes, I almost wanted her to catch me, not because I wanted the marriage to end, but because living with the secret was suffocating. Claire carried the same burden. One evening, after we'd spent hours tangled up in her bed, she lay with her back to me, staring at the wall. "Do you ever feel like we're digging our own graves?" she asked quietly. I didn't know how to answer. Because yes, I did feel that way. Every day, in fact. But I also knew that if I had the choice, I'd keep digging. I couldn't give her up. Not when she was the only thing keeping me from feeling like a ghost in my own life. There were close calls. Once, my wife asked why I'd started taking such long walks with the dog. "You're gone almost 2 hours some days," she said, narrowing her eyes. I shrugged, forced a laugh. "He's got a lot of energy," I replied. She let it go, but I could feel her suspicion like a weight pressing against my chest. Another time, Claire and I were at the coffee shop when someone from my office walked in. My stomach dropped. We didn't even look at each other after that, just sat in tense silence until he left. When we finally exhaled, Claire whispered, "We're going to get caught one day." I didn't disagree. Yet even with the risks, we couldn't stop. If anything, the danger made it more intense. There was something about knowing we were hiding in plain sight that made every kiss feel forbidden and electric. One evening, rain poured down as we walked the dogs. We ended up sheltering under a tree, soaked to the skin, laughing like kids. She pushed wet hair from her face, looked at me with those eyes, and suddenly the laughter turned into something heavier. We kissed right there in the open, rain pouring over us, the dogs whining impatiently at our sides. Anyone could have walked past. I didn't care. In that moment, it felt like the world didn't exist outside of her lips on mine. But the high always faded, replaced by the gnawing realization that I was balancing on a knife's edge. I started noticing details, whether my shirt smelled faintly of Claire's perfume, whether my wife looked at me too long as if she were trying to read my thoughts. The paranoia made my heart race in ways even Claire couldn't. And yet, I kept going back. Because here's the truth no one tells you about affairs, they aren't just about sex. They're about rediscovering a part of yourself you thought was gone forever. With Claire, I wasn't just a husband or a provider. I was wanted, desired, alive. Still, late at night, when the house was quiet, and the dog curled up at my feet, the weight of it all crushed me. I wondered how long we could keep this up before it all came crashing down. Would it be weeks, months, years? I didn't know, and maybe I didn't want to. Because deep inside, even as guilt clawed at me, I knew one thing with terrifying certainty. I wasn't ready to let her go. I've often wondered why I'm telling this story here, to strangers, under the safety of anonymity. Maybe it's because secrets are heavier than anyone realizes. Carrying them around feels like dragging chains everywhere you go. You smile, you nod, you go to work, you come home, but inside, the weight eats you alive. Writing this down is the only way I know how to breathe. The affair with Claire didn't end in some explosive scandal. There was no dramatic confrontation, no angry spouse barging into a hotel room. Life didn't collapse in a single moment. Instead, it went on, quietly, secretly, dangerously. My wife never caught me. She never even seemed to suspect. And maybe that's what makes it worse. We found ways to keep seeing each other, always cautious, always careful. Week after week, we lived in that fragile balance between ecstasy and ruin. Sometimes I'd swear I could see it in her eyes too, the fear, the thrill, the same war one fought inside myself. But every time we kissed, the war went silent. Over time, though, something changed. It wasn't the passion, it was the toll. The secrecy ate at me. The lies piled up, one on top of another, until I could barely keep them straight. I'd catch myself rehearsing excuses before I walked in the door, like an actor practicing lines before a performance. Traffic was bad. I stopped at the store. The dog needed a longer walk. Lies, all of them. But my wife accepted them without question, and that blind trust cut deeper than any suspicion ever could. Sometimes I looked at her and felt nothing but guilt. Other times, I felt anger, anger that she had pushed me so far away, anger that she hadn't noticed me slipping through her fingers. It's not fair, I know. I made my own choices. But affairs have a way of twisting your logic, convincing you that betrayal is somehow justified. The truth is, Claire gave me what I was starving for: attention, laughter, warmth, desire. She looked at me the way a man wants to be looked at, like I mattered, like I was alive. And once you taste that again after years of emptiness, it's almost impossible to let go. There were moments when I thought about ending it. Nights when I lay awake listening to my wife's breathing beside me, telling myself I had to stop before I destroyed everything. But then my phone would buzz with a message from Claire, "I miss you." And just like that, my resolve crumbled. You might expect this story to have a clean ending, me choosing one woman over the other, me confessing, me burning it all down. But real life isn't like that. Affairs don't always explode. Sometimes they fade, sometimes they shift, sometimes they linger in the background like ghosts you can't exorcise. Claire and we drifted, slowly, painfully. The meetings became less frequent, the texts shorter. Not because we stopped wanting each other, but because the weight of what we were doing finally grew heavier than the desire. She started talking about moving on, about finding someone she could love openly, without shame. I didn't blame her. The last time we saw each other, we sat on that same bench by the pond where it had all started. Our dogs played in the grass, just like they did the first day. She looked at me with a sad smile and said, "We can't keep doing this." I nodded, though my chest ached. I knew she was right. We kissed one final time, not hungry, not desperate, but soft, almost mournful. And just like that, it was over. At least, on the outside. Inside, she never really left. I still think about her when I walk my dog. I still remember the sound of her laugh, the feel of her hand brushing mine. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and my wife is asleep beside me, I close my eyes and relive it all. Not because I want to, but because I can't help it. That's why I'm writing this. Because secrets demand a voice, even if it's only whispered into the void. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. What I do know is this: I'm not the only one. There are countless people out there living double lives, smiling through dinners, kissing their children goodnight, while hiding affairs that no one will ever know about. And maybe that's the real confession here. Not the details of what happened between Claire and me, but the truth that infidelity doesn't always look like the movies. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's ordinary, sometimes it's just two lonely people walking their dogs, finding in each other what they've lost at home. My wife will never read this. She'll never know. She still trusts me, still believes I'm the man she married. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me selfish. But it also makes me human. So I stay anonymous, confessing only to strangers on the other side of a screen. Because in the end, this story isn't about her, or even about Claire. It's about me, the choices I made, the parts of myself I rediscovered, and the shadow I now carry quietly through my days. And every time I clip the leash onto my dog's collar, I remember how it all began. A simple walk, a smile, and a secret that changed everything. Disclaimer: this story is a fictionalized narrative created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental. The story explores mature themes intended for adult audiences. It does not promote or encourage infidelity but seeks to portray the emotional complexity of human relationships. Viewer discretion is advised. Every story I share here is a reminder that infidelity doesn't always come with warning signs or dramatic endings. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it's hidden behind everyday routines, like walking a dog. This isn't about glorifying betrayal but about revealing the reality of human weakness, loneliness, and temptation. If you found yourself hooked by this confession, there are many more stories like it waiting for you. Subscribe now and never miss the next jaw-dropping, heart-wrenching chapter in this ongoing series of true infidelity stories.